has given approximately 5,000 astronomy-related talks over the last 25 years. When he was the director of the Perkins Observatory, and this was not his full-time job. He also had a full-time job as a professor of English literature here at Ohio Wesleyan.
Writing.
English writing, I'm sorry.
Rhetoric and composition, as we call ourselves.
And so, but one thing that Tom has been interested in over these years has to do with the mythology of the heavens in various cultures. And a few of us have seen him speak on this subject, but it's been quite a few years since he last spoke on it. And Tom always gives a very entertaining talk.
Don't raise expectations. Dear God. I'm going to be boring, very boring.
He has assured me that this will be rated PG-13.
You can hold your hands over his ears during the video.
So I said that I am equally intrigued and slightly worried. I don't know what he's going to say, but
Only slightly, damn.
no, I said I was equally worried and intrigued. But it's always a pleasure. So Tom Burns, welcome.
The first thing we're going to do is what people like us love to do best, and that is, of course, turn off all the lights. Well, most of the lights. Because the simple fact is, folks, you can't see the universe with the lights on. And what we're going to do is imagine ourselves huddled around the dying embers of the campfire and tell some of the stories that people have told about the stars since we have been human. Why do that? Well, I don't know. I mean, I have to confess that there have been times where my editors from various newspapers have said, you know, are you going to write about science this week? And my answer is, as I think we'll see, I hope you'll see by the end of the talk, that the science is important. Knowing the spectral characteristics of BE stars is critical for your enjoyment of the nighttime sky. But looking at the stars is kind of like looking in a mirror. We see not only ourselves a little bit better, but also the world reflected behind us in ways we cannot see anywhere else. And when we look at these old stories, we see ourselves in the process of becoming human. And that's why I'd like to tell you those stories. Also, some of them are violence. Some of them are, well, sexual. In other words, they reflect our deepest human concerns, not just on the intellectual but on the physical level. And I think that's why we pay to occasionally actually take a look at them. We're going to start and end with the morning sky, because in the morning sky, as you know, there is a beautiful lineup of planets, but also rising in the morning sky right now is the summer Milky Way, and flying across that great river of light is the beautiful swan that we call Cygnus. Cygnus is actually Cygnus, from the ancient Greek, and I think you may be surprised at what that beautiful swan really represents. The classic story is, of course, Leda and the Swan, and it involves King Tiresias of Sparta, who was, you know, the Spartans, always going off to war and coming back. And it just so happens that the king of all the gods, Zeus to the Greeks and Jupiter to the Romans, like to take advantage of that fact. This will not be the only story I will tell you where some king is away and Zeus takes advantage of that fact. He almost always seemed to appear not as himself, but as some animal. And in this case, he appeared to Queen Leda as a beautiful swan. And of course, if you'll excuse the expression, had his way with her. Unfortunately, King Tiresias had also reappeared that very same day, so that both Tiresias and Zeus had had conjugal relations with poor Leda. So that 9 months later, she laid an egg. No kidding. And out of that egg sprang the offspring of Tiresias, who was the beautiful Queen Helen, who ended up doing that Troy thing later on. And also, one mortal and one immortal. Perhaps you recognize their names, Castor and Pollux, or Polydeuces to the Greek, who went on to become a constellation of their own, Gemini, in the winter sky. That's the relatively clean story. When the Romans got a hold of Cygnus, of course the Romans were a warlike culture, right? So they reinterpreted the story that Cygnus was actually the very warlike son of the god Mars, god of war. You can imagine the offspring, as usual, of the god and a mortal woman. Now, of course, Mars probably almost immediately abandoned his son to be raised by that mortal woman, a nymph. He didn't turn out too well. As a matter of fact, as the son of Mars and as an abandoned child, he turned into, well, how shall I put it, a flesh-eating, night-stalking, mass-murdering kind of guy who, in order to gain the favor of his father, decided that he would build a temple to his father, except that he wouldn't build that temple out of brick. He would build it out of many, many human skulls. This turned out to be a problem in Greece because this guy was going around killing a lot of people. So the gods looked down, the great god Zeus looked down, and he said, we have to do something about this. And So they got a hitman. That hitman is a name you might also recognize. His name was Heracles, or Hercules, also up there in the sky. Hercules, powerful guy, half human, half god, and so he dispatched poor Cycnus with one blow of his sword. Mars, rather belatedly, decided that he was sad for the death of his son and turned him, quite ironically, into a beautiful swan sailing over the river of light that we call the Milky Way. It gives a whole new feeling about that swan, doesn't it? Okay, so now I've told some violent stories. The thing about the sky is that it also reflects some kind of beautiful things about the sky as well, some spiritual things. And I don't think any object in the sky represents that better than the moon. Here it is full. People look at the moon. It's often identified in cultures around the world with the god of, and there always is a god or goddess of the hunt. Of course, to the Romans, it was the goddess Diana. And people see animals in the moon that represent that. To the Cheyenne people, it's a wolf, for instance. I never could see the man in the moon. But what you find, if you look at culture after culture, is people often see a rabbit in the moon. You see the rabbit? Got the two ears here, the head, the legs with the body, and then the legs sticking out behind it. I mean, it's like it's running across the sky. Now, there are a lot of stories about that rabbit. One of my favorites has to do with something that you find in culture after culture around the world. The hospitality code. One of my great sadnesses about our modern culture is that the hospitality code, especially towards strangers from distant lands, has disappeared completely. In the story of the hospitality code, you have the great god Shakira, who is wandering the earth, seeing what's going on there, in the form of a fox. And the fox travels around and is starving, so he visits this rabbit and begs the rabbit to go out and get him something to eat. Rabbits aren't very good at gathering the kind of food that foxes like to eat. The rabbit tries its best, it comes back empty-handed, and because the hospitality code is so crucial in that culture as it is in every culture, throws itself on the fire to provide food for the fox, at which point the fox transforms itself to the great god Shakira and rewards the rabbits by putting it into the sky for all to see in honor of its willingness to sacrifice even its own life to fulfill the need of that stranger that had wandered in its midst. But I said that was my favorite story. I lied. My favorite story is one I like to tell this time of year because it has to do with an upcoming holiday. It involves a goddess named Ostara, a Germanic Celtic goddess, whom the ancient Romans, as they moved into England, transformed into the goddess Eostra, the goddess Ostara, goddess of the east, goddess of the rising sun, goddess of the springtime, whose powers were greatest in the spring. And when her powers were the greatest, she would gather all of the children around her and perform feats of magic to their delight. And one day, near the first day of spring, she stuck out her finger to turn one of those children temporarily into a frog. And on her finger landed a beautiful songbird that began to sing a song so sweet, so beautiful, that the rocks and stones themselves began to weep at the beauty of the song. Of course, this delighted the children. It delighted them even more when she waved her hand above the bird and thump, it fell to the ground as a rabbit. It's the old conjuring trick. She didn't have a hat. She didn't need one. This delighted the children, of course, until they looked into the eyes of the rabbit and saw the two stone-cold tears running down its cheek. Why is the rabbit crying? Because the rabbit had been a bird that could sing a sweet celestial song that could fly high above the clouds, safe from all harm. Now, it was a bunny, earthbound, in danger, because as you know, there are a lot of animals in the forest that like to have bunny for breakfast. And so the children begged Eostra to change it back, but this she could not do, except on that day when her powers were at its greatest, on the first day of spring. And on that one day, Bunny became bird again. Now, tell me something. If you were a bird, especially, hint, hint, a female bird, and you only had one day to do bird stuff, what is it that you would do? Fly high above the clouds? I don't think so. I think that you would lay your eggs, and a lot of them too, so that on that day the bird laid its eggs, because on the next day bird became bunny again. And in gratitude to those little children who had begged Eostra to change the bunny back into a bird, that bunny delivered its eggs to all of the children of the world, because the goddess Eostra is the goddess Easter. Now, if you're a good Christian, You're probably asking yourself, what the heck is going on here? I mean, I remember even when I was a kid and we would go to Easter Sunday, I mean, what do eggs have to do with all of this? And the simple fact is that practice is therefore stolen from those Germanic tribes in England. Pagan. And the answer is, of course, if you look at the history of Christianity, the early Christians were excellent propagandists. They really knew that when they moved into a new territory, it was smart to grab some of the old practices of the old religion, the harmless ones. If you don't believe me that's true, ask yourself this, Christians. Why do you go outside and grab yourself, chop down a tree and bring it inside around Christmas? Well, the answer is that the Germans believed that in the tree inhabited a tree spirit, an ant. And when you brought the tree into the house, you brought that good luck, that spirit, into the house. And by the way, it's the same reason that you knock on wood, to wake up the spirit that lives in that chair to this very day. Turn on the heat. But you know what? It just occurred to me that I haven't explained why there's the bunny in the moon. And the answer is that on all of the other days, to keep the bunny safe from harm, Eostro puts the bunny on the moon where it may still fly high above the clouds, where it may still sing its sweet celestial song. And I swear to you, my friends, that on those calm, quiet nights when the full moon hangs in the sky and no one else is around, if you listen carefully, you can still hear that song. Now, so that's the good stuff, all right? That's the stuff that doesn't have the sex and violence. The thing is, though, all the rest of it does well. And, of course, I could tell stories all night, but I thought I'd concentrate on objects that are up right now. And, of course, everybody recognizes this time of year. Something that I always thought was strange is that in the early evening, at least, this is the best time in the early spring to see that great array of winter objects that is sometimes called the Orion Tableau. A word first about Orion. He goes way back to the Sumerians, 500 years before the Greek civilization. He was called Urana, the light of heaven, and he represents the Sumerian hero Gilgamesh. Anybody read the Epic of Gilgamesh by any chance? Well, you know his great battle with the bull Gudana, the bull of heaven, and there it is depicted in the sky for you. Now, of course, the Greeks added a lot of other stuff. Orion actually appears in the Iliad, and it is mentioned that he has with him his faithful dog, represented not by the constellation, as we call it, but by the bright star Sirius, the scorching one. And so what we have is a classic hunter's Tableau. The mighty Orion, his club raised above his head, his shield in the form of an animal skin, before him fighting the god Taurus, his main hunting dog, Canis Major. I should say that if you look at these old myths, you discover that Orion was strong, and Orion was brave, and Orion did a lot of good for the world, but he wasn't much in the brains department. So it is in the ancient stories, so it is above the stars, because he names his hunting dog Canis Major, loosely translated, my big dog. Of course, he has his emergency backup dog, Skippy, up here. Canis Minor, my little dog, my emergency backup dog. Yes, okay. Now, I have to say, I understand all that, and that makes sense. But why in heaven's name is Orion standing on a bunny rabbit? Bunny rabbits are a theme throughout this, and we're going to get to the bunny rabbit. But first of all, I want to say a little bit about Orion, because Orion represents the kind of weird qualities of these stories. Orion's birth is particularly strange. There are really two versions of it. One of them is the god Poseidon, who the Romans called Neptune, god of the sea, who had, guess what, illicit relationships with a mortal woman and gave birth to the god Orion. Now, the important thing about that story is that Poseidon did dote somewhat on the child, which is unusual, and in fact gave him a great power. And no, it wasn't his power as a hunter, it was his power to walk on water. We'll get back to that later. But the second story, which I'm just dying to tell because it's so weird, is the story of Orion's birth, having to do with a trip to Earth taken by the great god Zeus / Jupiter, Poseidon, Neptune, and Hermes, Mercury. And they, again, were walking around the earth, judging people. They came to a village, and they visited the houses, the huts, every one of them at that village, asking for sustenance, food and drink, and they were turned down at every place until they got to the poorest of those dwellings, where lived an old, starving man named Hyrieus. And Hyrieus, of course, believed in the hospitality code, and he gave to them a bit of what he had. He split up what little food he had, not enough even to feed himself, to feed the three that had come and visited him. And they were so impressed by his strict adherence to that sense of hospitality that they revealed themselves as immortal gods. You can imagine the scene. Whoppa! There they were, shining light all over him. And they said that they would give him his deepest heart's desire. And he asked, he had always wanted a son. This was difficult to arrange, given his the fact that he was in his old age. But Zeus at last had an idea. They went out back and they found a rotten old goat skin. In some versions of this myth, it's a rotten old bull skin. What a bunch of bullskin, you're saying to yourself. In mixed company, but I'm just going to go ahead and say the word tinkle. They wee-weed into the goat skin, instructed Hyreus to bury it, and a few moments later, out of the ground sprang the mighty hunter Orion. Orion had many adventures. Remind myself of which one I was going to tell you the one about this. Oh boy, this is a good one. And it explains why Orion is standing on a bunny. Okay, so on the Isle of Leros, has anybody ever been to the Greek islands? Oh, my friends. If you've been to the Greek islands, you know, if there is a paradise on this earth, it is on those islands. The climate is beautiful. Great fields of grain and vegetables. They want for nothing. Except on the Isle of Leros, they had one problem. They had no meat to eat. The concept of meat was foreign to them until one fine day, one of their inhabitants brought, because of that problem, a pair of bunnies, male and female, figuring what he knew about the procreative characteristics of bunnies, that they would have a lot of bunnies in no time, which they did. What he didn't count on was, unfortunately, these people didn't have a lot of experience hunting. And they were having a hard time actually catching the bunnies. So in practically no time at all, those of you who have ever owned bunnies will know that this is true. They had a lot of bunnies. There were bunnies in the basement and bunnies in the garage. Bunnies all over the place, but mostly there were bunnies in their great fields of corn and wheat and vegetables. And amidst all that abundance of bunnies, they were starving to death. So they made a call to all of the great heroes of the world. Powerful Bellerophon and his winged horse Pegasus, the great Theseus, who had slain the Minotaur, the great Hercules, who had performed those 12 labors and killed the monster Cycnus. But none of them were brave enough or strong enough or dumb enough to try to kill several million bunnies, except for the mighty hunter Orion. And so he came, and it took him a while. This involved a lot of climbing under things, etc., but he finally either captured or killed every one of those bunnies, and the Lerosians were saved. Now, Orion lived a long life. I'll get to one more of his heroic acts in just a minute. But when the time came finally for him to die, the gods looked down and recognized all the good that he had done and decided to turn him into stars and put him in the sky as you see him here. And as all of that happened, a single child was outside that night looking at the stars, and as those stars rose and formed the great hunter, she recognized him for who he was, and she made this silent prayer. It is right, it is meet, it is just, O great God Zeus, that you have put our Savior in the sky. But while you're at it, please also put the bunny Lepus firmly under his feet so he never bothers our island again. And her wish was fulfilled, and that's why Orion's stepping on a bunny. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, now, of course, Orion had all of the characteristics of the hero, which is that he really did want to do a lot of good. As a matter of fact, as we'll just see, I mean, his main job seemed to be pest control. He was the organ man of ancient times, so that he was also invited to visit, I want to get a name here, I can't remember the name. He was also invited to visit the Isle of, here we go, the Isle of Chios, where lived the king Onipion. Chios had a problem with monsters, basically, person-eating animals that were ravaging the countryside. And so they invited Orion to visit that island and slay these beasts, which he did. He was quite a hunter, which he did in short order. The trouble was that the king Onipion had offered his own daughter Merope to him as a wife, and immediately saw that Orion was not exactly marriageable material. He was a brute. So Onipion kept putting off the wedding and putting off the wedding until finally Orion got fed up and not only began to chase her around the table, Merope, but also her 6 sisters as well. This would not do. Orion basically got drunk. This was one of his problems. He had a drinking problem, I'm sorry. And he was going to, well, I just don't know what other word to use. He was going to rape all 7 of them. Luckily, he fell into a dead, drunken stupor. And Onipion took the opportunity to gouge out his eyes. I warned you. Orion awoke. He was blind and in pain. He stumbled off the island into the water. Luckily, remember, he could walk on water. And he was taken by the god Hephaestus, you might recognize him as Vulcan, as a guide, and they walked toward the rising sun. and the light from the rising sun healed his eyes. Now Orion lived a very long life and had many adventures, and eventually he was put in the sky. One story goes that in order to save the daughters, Zeus looked down and changed them into a flock of birds. They flew up and became the stars of the Pleiades, or seven sisters. And Orion, as punishment, was put in the sky, where he is forced to chase the Pleiades across the sky forever and never catch them. Which brings us to the Pleiades. Now I have to say, the Pleiades are probably responsible for the fact that I made it through college. Because, of course, the take on the seven sisters is that, to the unaided eye, there are only 6 of them. And I managed to milk this for 3 papers in a Roman mythology class, in an astronomy class, and in a class on the Greek and Roman poets, where I first read some of these great works. By the way, if you want to read these stories in their most beautiful, you'll find them in the works of the Roman poet Ovid in his Fasti and Metamorphoses. And I studied this, and I was going to answer the question, why are 6 stars called the Seven Sisters? I read all of those Roman poets in translation, and I came up with what I considered to be the definitive answer to that question. A drum roll, please. I have no idea. Not a clue. Because you read these poets, and they, in the end, many of them say, gee, I wonder why those ancient people long ago called 6 stars the Seven Sisters. And the upshot of that is that when you look at that beautiful collection of stars, you are probably looking at the oldest named part of the sky, even older, perhaps, than the mighty hunter Ur-Ana Orion. By the way, I forgot to mention, his father named him Urian, for obvious reasons, which eventually became Orion. Now, I have to confess to you, I just gotta tell some of those stories, and it really is a mystery. Sorry, I actually wrote this one. How am I doing on time? I actually wrote this one out as a script. As many of you know, some of you know, I'm really big into film noir and detective movies. And so, there are 300 billion stories in the naked galaxy. This is one of them. This is the galaxy, the place where the stars and gods hang out, the place I call home. I'm Detective Joe, Friday night programs at Perkins Observatory. You me Mr. Friday Night Programs at Perkins Observatory. Of those 300 billion stories, this is the one I like to call the case of the missing Pleiad. It's a tale of rape and seduction, of 7 women dragged into the sordid winter nightlife by rich and powerful dudes looking for a good time. The Pleiades are party girls, no doubt about it. They are the brightest stars in a cluster that comes out on those long winter nights when the rest of us stay close to home. They hang out at an after-hours dive called Taurus the Bull, a constellation high in the southern sky right now. It wasn't hard to find. My informant told me to go south on Orion Boulevard and look for the giant statue of the hunter. Then I hung a right and looked for the big fluorescent sign in front of the joint, a tipped-over V, the head of Taurus. Then I went up the stairs to the right to a small dipper-shaped cluster of 6 stars. There they were. It was a classy joint and a classy neighborhood. The ancients called them the 7 sisters, but only 6 are apparent to the naked eye. Binoculars easily show 7 bright stars and dozens of fainter ones, so one of them took it on the lam. I was hired to find out why. My snitches. The ancient Greek and Roman poets knew their names, but that was a long time ago. Today, nobody knows which star has which name, and the Pleiades aren't saying, so modern astrocoppers have assigned them names and numbers. On the left is Atlas, the star marked 27 on most mugshots. He's the big daddy of this brood, the old man to all the Pleiades. I approached him first, and he spilled his guts after I brought him a couple of shots of nectar, which is what the gods drink. Here's what he said. Listen, buddy, I was one of the top dogs in Olympus, a member of the Titan gang, when this heavy dude called Zeus started muscling in on our territory. Anyway, I got kicked out of Olympus, and Zeus made me hold up the earth forever. Before I got muscled out, I was married to Pleione, the nymph over there, and we had 7 beautiful daughters. He pointed to the stool next to him, the star just above him in the sky. In her time, she must have been quite a looker, as all the nymphs were. But lately, she's looking down in the dumps. After 4 or 5 double nectars, she told me she used to be a lot brighter. She lived life in the fast lane, spinning around 100 times as fast as our sun. That caused heavy turbulence in her atmosphere. As a result, she periodically spits out a bright shell of hydrogen gas. So you're the lost Pleiad, I asked? But by that time, she was lying face down in a bowl of nectar nuts. And didn't reply. I next observed Asterope, the faint double star marked as 21 on most star mode shots. I told her I thought she might be the missing Pleiad because she was so faint that I had used binoculars to see her. Listen, bub, she said, if I'm so faint now, what makes you think those ancient Greeks could see me? She had a point. So I turned to her sister Maya, number 20, and Taygeta, number 19, who were sitting next to each other. We were seduced by Zeus, the main man up on Mount Olympus, Mala told me. So was Electra over there, she said, pointing to the star at the bottom right of the Dipper. I gave birth to Hermes, god of the hunt. Taygeta here had Lacedaemon. He founded the ancient city of Sparta. Electra over there is more likely. She gave birth to Dardanus, who founded the city of Troy. When the Greeks wasted it in the Trojan War, some say she hid her eyes so she wouldn't have to witness the carnage. I turn to the brightest of the sisters, Alcyone. What a knockout. She's the upright star in the bowl of the Dipper. She sidled up to me on the bar stool and said, "It wasn't me, handsome. I've always been the best looking and most visible sister. I'm a blue-white giant with a luminosity rating of over 1,000 times the sun. Nobody's ever had trouble seeing me." She said that she and her sister Solano, number 16 on the mugshot, had been ravaged, loosely expressed, ravaged by Poseidon, the god of the sea. I heard Solano got struck by a bolt of lightning from Zeus, and that's why she's so faint. Alcyone seductively. I looked at Solano. She was just at the limit of naked eye visibility and was a prime suspect. Next, I checked out Merope at the bottom left of the Dipper. She denied being the lost Pleiad. That's not what I heard, I said. One of my snitches, a Greek poet named Aristophanes, told me that all your sisters hung out with the gods. You're the only one who married a regular mortal, a loser named Sisyphus, who ended up in Hades, rolling a rock up a hill for all eternity. So you hid your face in shame because you didn't hook a high-class husband. Yeah, well, she said, I'm the best dressed. I got out my telescope and took a closer look. She and most of her sisters were enveloped in a faint cloud of nebulous gas. Hers was the brightest. She was the best dressed. We're hot young stars, she said. What you're seeing is a cloud of gas through which we are passing. Our light reflects off the gas and causes it to glow. Pretty, huh? While I was putting my eyes back in my head, she snuck off. What a bunch of losers, I said to the bartender. Don't be so hard on them. They've had rough lives. A lot of folks say that they ended up in the sky because Orion was going to ravish them. So Zeus took pity and turned them into a flock of doves. When they reached the sky, they turned into stars. But that's not the straight dope. They volunteered to be here. When they heard their father Atlas had to carry the whole world on his shoulders, they offered to be put up in the sky so that he would have that much less weight to carry. That night, I took the long way home, past the Milky Way, around the universe. As I flicked my last cigarette into the darkness, I was haunted by their stories of 7 sisters who suffered much but made the ultimate sacrifice to ease their old man's burden. I better get on with it. I'm just going to tell you a bunch of stories about Ursa Major. If there is a constellation in the sky that has the most number of stories attached to it around the world, then it is the story of Ursa Major. Now, I'm sure you have all heard the story that we get from the Greeks, the story of Callisto and Arcus. So I'm going to skip that one tonight, and instead talk about a couple of stories that come out of Native American Indian culture. The first of those, one of my favorites because it is an attempt to explain the seasonal changes, which some of these stories are, is an old Iroquois tale about 4 hunters, or 3 hunters and a cook pot. And it is, and I think this is really quite wonderful, actually. Does that look like a bear to you? No. Me neither. And yet, you look at culture after culture around the world, and you see a bear. It's really quite strange. I better go back to nerd mode here, just a minute. Now, the Greeks, of course, saw quite a larger constellation, a bear with a long tail. You know how the bear got the long tail, right? Zeus grabbed the formerly beautiful Callisto and her son Arcus by their short, stubby little tails and dragged them into the sky. That's how the bears got the long tail. The bear in the Native American cultures was usually just the 4 stars of the bowl of the Dipper, and they are usually being chased by either 3 or 4 hunters. Of course, it's pretty obvious what the 3 hunters are. Then, of course, you have the star at the bend of the handle, Mizar, that has the star Alcor with it. That is either a 4th hunter or a cook pot. Why they need the cook pot will be obvious when we look at the stories. Now, the Iroquois tale is one of my favorites. What you have is the biggest, fattest, nastiest bear in the forest, which is going to attract the attention of a lot of hunters. And so those hunters ceaselessly chase the bear, never managing to